Good morning, my biology friends. I'm on my porch, balcony, roof. You know, the weather's just too nice to film inside, so I decided to come out. This week we're talking about how evolution happens. Last week we talked about evolution, and now we're talking about how. We know it exists, we have the evidence, but how does it work? The topics that we'll cover are natural selection, common ancestry, and speciation. Just as a reminder, evolution is a theory that states that all living things on Earth, the plants, the animals, the bacteria, everything, has evolved from a common ancestor. And over time, those species continue to evolve and change and diversify. In this image, we have the evolution of the whale. Millions and millions of years ago, the species that whales evolved from was actually more kind of dog-like. And it's a great example of the way life just continues to change and find different niches. Okay, let's continue. Natural selection. The term was coined by, or first given a name, by Charles Darwin. So basically, natural selection is the process that happens over time where organisms become better adapted for their environment. This happens over many, many generations. And the traits that make an organism more suitable for their environment or able to survive better are passed on to the next generation. For example, let's say we have 3 animals that are similar to giraffes, not giraffes yet. Of these 3, which one is going to survive? Only one of them, right? Just this guy, because he has a long neck. So this long neck giraffe will pass those long neck genes onto its children. So his children will probably have long necks. How does it work? There are 3 key elements of natural selection. The first is that within a population, so a group of organisms, there needs to be genetic variation. It takes a mutation to create that genetic variation. Differences in genetics, right? If we have the same exact genetics over and over again, there would be no change or evolution. Those variations need to provide an advantage. The mutation needs to help the organism. For example, back to the giraffe example, that one giraffe with the really long neck, that was actually a mutation. His, siblings and parent generations didn't have that long neck, but he was kind of a freak. He had a long neck, but it made him survive a lot better, and so his genes were able to be passed on. The genetic mutations are completely random. One day there happened to be a giraffe with a longer neck, and it survived really well, so it continued to evolve in that way. So this is called survival of the fittest. And it's not fittest like the strongest or with the sharpest teeth. Sometimes that is what it means. But it could also mean the best camouflage or the most able to withstand dry weather, things like that. Whatever makes that organism suitable for its habitat is the fittest. Those members that have the advantage or the mutation will need to produce more offspring than the others. They are able to find mates easier because of this advantage that they have. So those are the 3 key features of natural selection that make it possible and make evolution and speciation possible. Here's an example. This population of mice, these are mice, 2 colors. There's tan mice and there's black mice. Mice are eaten by birds, like hawks. Because of the terrain or the ground that the mice live, the tan ones stand out more. and the black ones blend in. They are more camouflage. And so, because the tan ones are more visible, they get eaten a lot easier. There are more black mice reproducing than tan mice because they are better suitable for that environment. So over time, there will naturally be less and less tan mice because of the quickness that the tan mice get eaten, and they are unable to pass along those tan genes. There's a name for genetic variations, or these mutations that make the organisms better suited for their environment. Adaptations. Adaptations are the changes in the genetics of the offspring that creates an advantage for that offspring. For example, hummingbirds have long, thin beaks, which helps them because they eat nectar from flowers. Nectar is found within the flower. It's like a sugary, watery substance. That long, skinny beak is an adaptation. It's not just a change that happens within a lifetime, it has to do with the passing of these traits to offspring. It's not just a change, like skin getting tanner in the summer, or, a fish becoming a better swimmer. It's the traits being passed on that you're born with. Okay, so it's not just about survivability that creates change within species. It's also the ability to obtain a mate. This is called sexual selection. Sexual selection is the passing on of traits that make the species better able to find a mate and reproduce. So what this creates is really prominent colors or very distinct mating calls. An example of this is this little friend over here. This is a bird of paradise. If you go on Google and type in birds of paradise mating dances, you will get all kinds of the most bizarre looking birds. And they've evolved this way because of sexual selection. This friend right here is doing his little mating dance. So he's waiting for a female to come over and say, all right, let's do this. Let's fertilize some eggs. I'm ready to reproduce with you. I've chosen you based on the brightness of your colors and, the broadness of your wingspan. There's also a thing called artificial selection. We started talking a little bit about this in class, but GMOs, genetically modified organisms, any type of farming or breeding, so like dog breeds, dogs are actually related to wolves. They just look different because human beings have bred them that way. We choose the traits of the organisms, whether it's dogs or tomato plants, that we like. And then there's genetic drift. Things like natural disasters and random chance can cause drifting in the alleles in a population and what traits are able to get passed on. Okay, species. What is a species? So a species is a classification that have the same traits and are able to produce fertile offspring with each other. So as I said, dogs and wolves are technically the same species. They are able to reproduce because they are so genetically similar. If you were to take the genetics of a toad and try to mate it with a bird, it wouldn't work out because their genetics are too different. Or in this example, they use a toad and a frog. They are able to reproduce, but their offspring can't reproduce. So that's the key thing, is the ability to reproduce and having those similar traits. Species are being created and discovered every single day. So this is a process called speciation. Speciation is when you have one species and it divides into two or more different species. And this happens because of reproductive isolation. So let's go back to Darwin and his finches. This is a map of the Galapagos Islands, which is where Darwin did a lot of his research. He was studying finches. Finches are a type of bird. He proposed that there was one type of finch, but as these islands got more and more separate, and these birds were unable to reproduce with each other due to that isolation, right? They can't reach each other because they're so far apart, and they have different needs on each island, depending on the ecology of the island, and so they evolved in different ways. So reproductive isolation happens when two populations, maybe it's finches, maybe it's foxes, are unable to breed. They can't because of physical distance, or maybe the area floods and there's now a river between the population, or sometimes maybe a highway is built through the forest and it splits the squirrel population in half, and that separation means that genetic differences will eventually occur. The populations will evolve separately, and eventually their genetics will be so different that they can no longer reproduce, or they can reproduce but it's not an organism that can reproduce, and so it just ends there. There's a way that we can figure out how related species are with each other, and this is through cladograms. Some say cladogram, I say cladogram. I'm sure some people say cladogram, and it shows how they diverge. One of these little notches is called a node. In this cladogram, the chimpanzee is most similar to the bear. It is least similar to the lamprey. That's this guy. And then another example, the newt is more similar to the sunfish than the lizard is to the sunfish. So the closer the two organisms are, the more closely related they are. And we figure this out by comparing their traits and their genetics. Chimpanzees and bears, they're mammals, so they have a common mammal ancestor. If we take it a step back even further, back in time, the newt and the chimpanzee, the only thing that they share is a tetrapod. Tetrapods are organisms with 4 legs. Tetra means 4, pod means feet. So these diagrams can help us figure out the relation between species. So this is like a very, very simplified tree of life. Just in this space alone, we are summarizing 4 billion years ago. So if it starts here with a common ancestor, which is a prokaryotic organism, the last universal common ancestor, and it shows the way things branch off. Prokaryotes, eukaryotes, that's the domain. Animal, fungi, plant, protist, archaea, and bacteria, that's the kingdom. You have probably heard the phrase the animal kingdom or the plant kingdom. That's because these classifications are kingdoms. And then below that there is phylum. And then from there is class, and so on and so forth. Alright guys, reporting to you from my roof. Here's my cat. Here's my doggy. There's me. Decked out, Salem Pride, baby. As always, hit me up with questions. That's all I got. Alright, peace.